From Wakefield, it's the Nolan Carr Night Show, inviting you to join Nolan and his guest this week, former tennis teammate and current sports media professional Nathan Robillard to the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the show. And joining this week, actually on camera, unlike last week where I had to do it over the phone through Zoom, and that was a tumultuous time editing that, is a dear friend. And I got to know this man better by the end of the year last year, where we were on the same club tennis team together. Now he's run the gauntlet as a reporter, not just on screen, but behind the scenes as well, on paper form as well. You may hear him or see him at women's basketball games at the University of Rhode Island during their historic run this year, or men's games, depending on their success during the year as well as the soccer pitch as well. Here's the man stuff, Nathan Robillard. Nathan, how are you today?
Doing good, man. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Well, of course,
Looking forward to it.
you're a busy man, and of course, I had to have someone on who's really getting the thick of things. That's the sports season at our own institution, or my former institution, your current institution.
hmm
Why not during this interesting era for you? I sort of have asked this to others I have had on, and you being a student of the game, but also
hmm
a professional as well, combined with being a student. You've now, unlike maybe others, where when I was around your age at URI who experienced before the craziness, you got to experience it as it's starting to now
Yep.
unfold and get out of it now. Hopefully, be really fast forward past it for you to sort of now be able to have the opportunities that previous classes got to before the pandemic. Now it's opening up again. What's that like?
Yeah, it's great, and especially because I hear stories of how it was during COVID and how it was before COVID. And obviously, the sports media major is relatively new. It's like 3 4 years old, and that came as a result of the popularity in journalism and in sports journalism.
Yeah,
So it's really awesome to be able to come at a time where it's growing so much, and especially being fortunate enough to come on a year kind of coming out of COVID rather
yeah,
than being in that pandemic year. But like I've done a couple of broadcasts through our sports with ESPN Plus, which the Atlantic 10 has a partnership now with ESPN Plus, so they're allowing students to not only announce the games, but also to get behind the camera and to work on the technical aspect of it. So you know different ways of broadcasting and reporting and writing that are just giving so many students all these new opportunities, and it's just awesome to be a part of it and
sure.
watch it grow even in the short time that I've been here.
Well, I know with those who have had on who've gone through the process of URI sports media and as a student, and those who have graduated from that, those like yourself are currently in it. I've talked about this whole situation where they've experienced this with Shane and so forth. And unlike Adam Bernstein, who sort of asked, "What is your why?" on his little show, I like to ask this question. The last 3 years, this whole experience has sort of changed, not just physically, but mentally. Everybody. So, what has Nathan learned about himself that he didn't know prior to the last 3 years?
Well, coming in, I would say the biggest thing was I always came into school like dead set on being a broadcaster. Like I wanted to be like the voice of sports. I wanted to like talk about sports. That's what I wanted to do. And so the first semester, that's what I did. I joined radio, but and that's kind of how I got my start commentating games. But second semester last year, I decided why not get more involved. So I joined the Cigar, started writing about sports,
Yeah.
which is something I didn't really think that I wanted to do at first. And then I
Yeah.
really loved it. And I really now I'm going into this semester as the sports editor for the Cigar. And I really, really enjoy writing and like kind of the behind the scenes
Sure.
aspect of reporting where like maybe it's not you're not like the on camera talent, but you're
Sure.
still getting to like tell the story of games and stuff. So really for me it's just like sort of widening my horizons and
Yeah.
finding different ways to do what I like to tell the story, to report games. And I don't think I would have seen myself getting so involved in the writing and reporting
Sure.
side of things.
For you, and I also asked this as sort of a thing I want to talk about besides, the craziness of the pandemic and not getting people too upset and giving their own dark opinions about it. Well, everyone has a story of starting in sports, but also realizing that, and not maybe not with your situation since you still play tennis on the club
hmm
team, but those realize that I probably won't be making it past high school sports. So let me try to find
Yeah.
another area. And you sort of mentioned how you started doing the radio here at URI and how that sort of was your shtick before it leaned into everything else. For you, when did that interest peak for you to want to cover sports, regardless if you thought, oh, maybe I'd be able to do something in college as an athlete?
Well, it so for me, it kind of took a couple different paths, because I started off knowing I wanted to work in like journalism, news reporting. I always really enjoyed kind of the writing, and there was a point where I didn't even know what kind of writing I wanted to do. And this was way back, but I always kind of enjoyed like telling stories, reporting things. Like I always liked kind of like when I was little, I liked like when the news was like dramatic and
Yeah,
there'd be like a storm and they show all like the images and the pictures and,
sure.
and tell the story. That was always kind of really interesting to me. Um, and then sort of so as you sort of mentioned, I'm a huge soccer fan. So in 2015, I remember this. I went to my first soccer game at Gillette Stadium. It was New England Revolution playing Houston Dynamo in MLS, and that's where I kind of got hooked to the sport aspect of it itself. I was like, hey, I sort of want to follow this team, so I follow them. I followed them for the next 2 years. I started, watching all their games and doing this and that, and through that, I started kind of getting an introduction. It was the age where I was starting to get into like social media, Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff, and would follow these like fan pages that would report, you know, do the little reporting, the breaking news, all that. And I was kind of thinking that's really cool. Like I want to do
Yeah.
something like that. And so I had like a short stint in middle school where I like tried to start up one of those fan pages, and it was
Yeah,
just it never really got off the ground because it was hard at that point to stay consistent with it. But I
sure.
I always remember thinking like in high school, like, that was really fun. I'd really enjoy to do this as like a job or to pursue this as school. And then going back to what you said, it was like, I played soccer in high school, but I was never amazing at it.
Sure.
And I was kind of like, it would be awesome to kind of stay involved in the game, stay
Yeah,
involved in the sporting world. If it's not going to be in a playing capacity, just can kind of combine that passion for like writing and reporting, and might as well go into the sports world with it. So that's how that kind of all came to
sure.
pass. And
Do you remember maybe a specific moment where you sort of maybe it was people saying it to you, or maybe you found it within yourself where you said, "Hey, I have something here reporting on these stuff." Maybe not just beginning at URI, but maybe beforehand when you sort of got that realization that covering sports is something that I may want to do.
yeah, so again, this it'll go back to me, and this very specific with along with soccer and the teams I follow. I was always following the U.S. national team. Around the 2015, 2016, maybe I started following them, and I remember they competed in a summer tournament, and they competed against, Brazil, Argentina. It was a South American tournament that they were invited to, and that got broadcast on Fox Sports, and there was two broadcasters, and I remember one phrase um, from this broadcast. This broadcaster, you're watching games, and they all have like their own little phrase that they do.
Yeah.
They're all little saying. This guy's when he would introduce halftime, he would do like he'd say like 45 minutes down, 45 to go, and he'd do it in like a very dramatic, very held out voice. And that was like I like loved that, and I don't know why I loved that, but I loved it so much, and I was like, that's so cool that he can use his voice to that effect,
Yeah,
and really like that's when I started to realize like the work that these guys are doing helps bring this production to the next level.
sure.
It's much more than me just watching the game. Now I'm able to like, they're bringing in the analysis, the play by
Sure.
play, and I was like, that would be an awesome job. That would be such a
Sure.
fun job. I didn't really think at that point that maybe I would be able to do that, but that I would always had it in the back of my mind from that moment, that week, that I was like, that would be so cool to do, you know,
Sure.
and get paid to do.
Yeah. Unlike maybe myself, who applied to very little schools, I would think that the institution that we both share that I've already mentioned, URI, wasn't the only one that either you applied to or
Mhm.
got into. About the school, though, and most maybe have an idea of it when they are living in the New England area, or if they do research, they found out, oh, the men's basketball team was this successful in the 80s into the 90s and somewhat in the 2000s. For you, though, about the institution and the availability of the sports media department, was there any inkling of what was there at URI, or was it just something like, oh, that's not super far from my home, but that's not super close?
Yeah. So senior year of high school, my idea was always to go into journalism, to go in some sort of broadcast journalism, and when I really started to narrow it down to sports, was around the time that college applications were happening. And originally, I wanted to, I'm from Connecticut. I'm about an hour away from URI, so I wanted to go to a school farther away. I kind of wanted a little bit of a change, but I was looking at schools that had sports media, Not a
Sure.
lot of schools had it. A lot of schools had, journalism, media, and it was like, well, if there's a sports media program at this school, that could really be a big focus. It could
Sure.
it could separates them from the rest. And URI was one of the schools I heard about that had just implemented a sports media major. That I heard it was growing fast. I heard a lot of good things about it. With a lot of opportunities, like you were talking about. I applied to some big schools as well. Like I applied to Syracuse. I wanted to go to their school of communications, but the thing with a big school like that is you look at their, obviously they're nationally recognized football, basketball teams,
Sure.
and students aren't really getting the chance to get involved in those broadcasts. Here at URI, like I'm on TV broadcasting men's basketball, and
Yeah.
that's truly I think what I like most about URI. There was a kind of a time where I was like, why did I end up at URI? I didn't have anything against the school, but I was kind of wondering, like, there has to be a reason that I went
Yeah.
here and not to one of those big schools. And now that I've gotten the opportunities that I've had, I've sort of been like, yeah, I wouldn't really get this experience anywhere else.
Sure. Well, I sort of want to go off of that. It leads into my next question. Talking about that, and we've already mentioned that briefly about getting your opportunities to cover these big time sports really early on compared to schools like Syracuse, where it's maybe actually people in the
Hmm.
field professionally making money doing it instead of students covering the games. I remember because I did the school newspaper, The Good 5 Cent Cigar, for about a year and a half, but really was only a year. Um, and I remember practically primarily all the sports you do, which I would think maybe freshman year you would cover all these smaller programs, maybe the track and field, or maybe some of the less successful programs, or women's tennis at the time. My freshman year wasn't too great, though they had just got a new coach. And you sort of take those, and then at some point you have the cojones to say, okay, I want to try this bigger sport. And then you're given the keys to the castle in the sense to start covering bigger stories. For you, though, how do you remember handling that early on, realizing or being told that this is how you sort of start, and then at some point you're given more leniency in terms of covering other sports? And was it something that you accepted and realized, just biding my time, and soon I'll be getting these bigger stories?
Yeah, if you had told me beginning of freshman year that I would be where I am now and I would already have the chance to cover men's basketball, women's basketball, I wouldn't, I would think you're crazy. I wouldn't have believed it. I kind of knew early on that this is this is a major that is very competitive. It's going to take, you just got to work, and you got to do the kind of, pay your dues type stuff, if you will. Have to cover the sports not everyone wants to cover, have to do the small sorts. That was all kind of stuff that I, had in the back of my mind going in. Spent a lot of my first semester with the cigar writing about track, getting to know the track coaches, the tennis team, taking those stories that weren't basketball and women's basketball. But, I was kind of always fine with that because I was like, there's a lot of, juniors, seniors here that probably deserve to take these stories. I'm only a
Sure.
freshman, I'm just gonna have to kind of work my way up. But I think
Yeah.
I always sort of had it in the back of my head that, like, hey, this is something where you really do have to start small and work your way up.
Going off that, I've mentioned Shane's name briefly and all the other people involved in the sports information department that have a role in, giving opportunities to cover these games on TV or whatever the case may be, ESPN 3 or Plus or whatever the situation is. And unlike maybe the classroom in the paper where you have editors there and all sorts of other people right there with you, or teachers and professors helping you, when you're on TV, you're all alone. You're doing it by yourself, although you have people there, producers and stuff. When you're having the opportunities to be on ESPN Plus, ESPN 3, and all these other situations, even the radio, how did you find yourself psyching yourself up in the scenario of, okay, I just have to do this, and if I mess up at first, that's okay, but I'll be able to do this with no problem eventually? Was that a difficult transition, or was that something that you were ready to try to whack at?
Yeah. So the thing with the sports media department is, as we mentioned, the major is relatively new. It's, I think, 3 years old. So there's not a lot of classes, especially as a freshman or sophomore, that are really going to teach you how to, like, prepare for a real situation like that. For me, I was lucky enough to get my start with radio. And radio and TV are similar in a lot of ways. You're putting on the headset, you're courtside, you're field side, you're whatever, you're at the game, you're calling the game. So I started first month of my freshman year, on the bleachers at the soccer field, sort of freezing cold with that headset on, and kind of just learning the ropes, learning the ways. And I, just kind of listen to what you watch a lot of games, listen to what the pros do, and you kind of take things each time. You listen to when you do it with someone who's maybe better than you, or when I did it with Zach, who we mentioned, who was had a year on me, and I listened to some of the things he did, and obviously he's had a lot of success with some of that. And as you sort of do these broadcasts, you pick something up every time. You start to get a little bit more comfortable on the mic. By the time I got the opportunity to do my first TV broadcast, which was for baseball, it was the spring of last year. I had enough radio experience where I was sort of like, I know what this is going to feel like. I know what this is, but I still really wasn't prepared for the production aspect of it. So you sort of go in a little bit blind for your first one. This kind of goes for any broadcast, radio or TV, and you just sort of tell yourself, you're going to mess up. It's not if you mess up. It's you're going to make mistakes. Yeah. Everyone does. Everyone will. And kind of the main important thing that's hard at first, but you learn is ignore it, or not ignore. You make this mistake, you get over it. There's no changing it. You just move on. You can't let it dictate. If I make a silly mistake 15 minutes into a soccer game, I have 75 minutes left. Yeah. I'm not going to let that ruin the rest of the game. And the other side of that is it's all about how you present yourself. If you say something, if you accidentally say something that, a wrong stat, it's off by a number, it's off by a few points, whatever it is. Yeah. But you sound like confident saying it. You have the confidence in your voice. You have, you're able to project yourself. You're able to present yourself like that. Less people are really going to be like, oh, hey, this guy sucks. Like,
sure. Yeah.
So it helped. I think that the early broadcasts I did were very low stakes, not many listeners. The platform was relatively small, and there I was just able to kind of grow myself, like sort of perfect what I was doing, take things every time. But first TV broadcast for me, I kind of went into it knowing, hey, it might not be great. I might make some mistakes, but everyone does, and that's the only way you really learn from it. And that's kind of just something you take from the experience. And coming out of my first game, was I super happy with it? I'm kind of thinking, no, that was my opportunity. I could have done better.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you just keep going. You take the next one. You listen back. You look at what you can take from it, and then you implement that next time, and you just keep learning every time. So it's a slow process, but you just got to kind of keep kicking, keep staying involved, keep looking for opportunities.
Well, we mentioned, and we've been talking about sort of climbing up the ladder of covering sports in the sports media world, not just in general, but at URI specifically as a student as well. When you came time for you realizing that, okay, I've been covering the track and field, the volleyballs, the baseball, sports like that, to then saying, okay, I think I'm ready. I think I'd be able to do a women's soccer game, men's soccer game, to then maybe a basketball game, whether it's radio or for TV, a women's team, and then men's basketball. How do you remember handling that? And do you think you were ready to step up to that in the sense of not letting that inflate your ego in any way negatively?
Yes. So for me, it's like my kind of mentality early on was, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to put my name out there for everything. And there's going to be some things that I don't get because, I'm a freshman, I'm brand new. But if they say the way that it would work, for example, for radio, is we have like a group me chat. And whenever there was a broadcast, maybe a week before the game, they put out a message and they'd say, like the message if you want to be a part of the broadcast. You get like 10, 12 likes for men's basketball because it'd be a very popular sport. And you kind of liked it knowing this is going to go to someone who's been doing it for a long time. But so my mentality was just sort of like all those messages, sign up for everything, put your name out there for everything and get, take what you can get. And what, obviously what I got was a lot of the track and field, men's and women's soccer, stuff like that. So I think the first time, you get put on a basketball game, say first time I got put on a women's basketball game, I wasn't really sure what to expect. And you sort of go in with, or at least I went in with a mentality of, I'm mostly doing this to learn what this is about and, learn how it is, how I can, adapt to this bigger environment. Because the basketball environment at the school is like no other. It's beautiful facility. It looks like a professional facility. There's the media tables. You have professional media, outlets from Rhode Island at those games with you. So the first couple times you do it, it's really just taking it in, experiencing it, understanding where you are, what environment you're in, how you have to present yourself. It's very different from, sitting on the bleachers, with like a hundred other college kids on the bleachers at a soccer game. Now you're here, you're where you want to be. You're in a sports media environment. So it's kind of an adjustment. It's very professional. It's very real, and so you spend a lot of time, I think, and it's nothing you can really prepare for until you're there. So you
Yeah.
spend a lot of time sort of just taking that in, and wow, I got here, and then here now, what do I do? What are the
Sure.
next steps?
Well, now you get to a level once you start covering these basketball games, these football games eventually, or whatever the other situation may be for higher level programs here at URI. You start to get, of course, more comfortable, and you say, "Oh yeah, I can do this. There's no problem. Why was I self doubting myself earlier on in my experiences?" During it though, you have eyeballs on you, tons of eyeballs or ears on you in terms of people listening it on Learview
Hmm.
Sports or on the radio or when it was on the radio or watching it on TV or any streaming service that is there. At this point in your experiences covering either the basketball programs or any of the programs you've done, is it something that sort of is flushed out of your mind and put on the back burner that you don't focus on as much as maybe you were at the beginning? Because you talked about a few minutes ago of slipping up and people saying, "Oh, he doesn't sound good or maybe good." Is this something that you don't really focus now that you've had all this experience on you?
I think, to be honest, I think it's important to keep, in a sense, to stay on your toes. I think there's been a few times where I've sort of let myself relax a little bit because I'm more used to that environment. I'm more used to what to do. The scene, the media scene, the environment isn't as intimidating. So I sort of let myself relax a little bit. And I think it's in those moments where I don't do as well necessarily.
Sure.
I think my view is I need to like understand that even though I have these opportunities, I'm still a sophomore. I've only been doing this for a year and a half, and there's always ways that I can improve. And I'm
Sure.
far from perfect. I'm far from professional. I would say I'm nowhere near, a professional level yet. And I just have to keep it in my mind that I still have a lot of learning to do.
Sure.
There's always things I can pick up that I didn't learn the last time. And so I think sometimes where it becomes more of like oh, I have another game today, let's just go through the motions, that's when
Sure.
you start to fall behind a little bit. I kind of try to keep myself in a mentality where I'm like, find something not to be nervous about, but put a little bit of pressure on,
Yeah.
try to focus on one thing, pick stuff up here and there, and just try to find something to improve on every single time. So I think kind of treating each game as a new unique experience has been really helpful, and it's still something I'm learning how to
Sure.
do. As I said, like I catch myself going to games and being like, oh well, I've done this 10 times before this season, this will be fine, and then I go into it without that kind of pressure on me, and it's not as great as it could be.
Sure. You talked about the soccer game starting out, and you were working with Zach Austin, a teammate of both of ours, and learning from him and saying, "Oh, what was he saying? How does he do this? How does he do that?" So you're feeling more comfortable knowing what you're doing, and you see all the heavyweights in the professional world, Joe Buck and Jim Nance, and all these people who do their research. Obviously, you have to do research, so it makes it seem like you know what the hell you're talking about, even if you don't. And Stone Freeman, Zach Austin's idol and hero, it was prolific for doing his research and showing it on Twitter and having all this highlighted information, all these words and all this stuff, and all these papers and packets and manila envelopes and all sorts of stuff. For you, compared to a basketball game where you put their names and where they're from and their stats and their recent games and stuff, how do you find yourself making sure you're preparing entirely and completely for each event you're doing, regardless if it's the same one each time, a basketball game every single week, or if it's different ones varying throughout the season or year for you?
Yeah, prep work is super difficult because there's no one way to do it, and it's it's different for everybody. It's whatever works for you. So I've done a lot. I've been lucky enough to have a good amount of games, and I'm still kind of doing a little bit. I change something up a little bit every time, just trying to make it the best for me, and it depends on the sport. For like basketball, for example, it's very fast paced. You're gonna have very little time to look down at a sheet of paper without looking up and missing, two possessions, two plays. It's a very back and forth quick game. So I have to design that in a way where the most important stuff is visible when I glance down quickly.
Sure.
So, I have the numbers and the names bold highlighted. Those are the biggest text. And then, I have like general stats and stuff that I'll put below that, not as big, but what I need to know for basketball in the blink of an eye is who's that, what's his name, what's her name, what's their number, and quick stats.
Sure.
So that's what I'll do for basketball. But a sport like baseball, you have a lot of downtime. Between at bats, between innings, you have a lot of downtime. So you have a little bit more time to, look down at your prep and sort of scan through it and see what you have. So you can have a lot more information there, general filler information, a lot of general stats. In terms of where I find the information, Rhode Island's sports information department does a great job on GoRhody.com. It has detailed stats, schedules, results for all of the teams. So there's all the information you could ever want on that site. And I can't say I don't have really a lot of experience outside of URI broadcasting. So I've been lucky enough to sort of be in this environment where the sports information department does a great job presenting you with everything you need. It's just a matter of sort of catering it to the sport. Again, for sports like soccer and baseball, where you have a lot more time, it's a lot more open. It's a lot, as compared to basketball, where it's just constant action. You're going to use a lot less background information. You're going to have a lot less time to introduce stats, and it's more about what's happening. So it's just kind of sort of figuring out what works for you, which took me a very long time to do. And as I said, I sort of try to change my style a little bit every time, and just sort of, hey, what could I have done better based on what I had trouble with last game? Let's change that up. Let's include this piece of information. So it's kind of a building process that I consider myself not, fully built yet.
Sure. I have an idea or an assumption of some maybe your goals for covering URI sports before you graduate and go into the real world and get paid some serious coin for it, or maybe some serious coin for starting out. For you though, before graduating, what is Nathan's bucket list or checklist in terms of things he wants to cover or be able to say, I was able to do this type of story or this type of coverage during my time at URI for the sports?
Yeah. So my main goals, and I take it by semester because things pop up. For example, like beginning of this year, I would have never thought that I even got the opportunity to be on TV for basketball. And then, the sheet went out, the email went out, and I was lucky enough to be on that list. So opportunities kind of present themselves when you least expect it. But in terms of goals, I'd obviously like to continue to stick with our teams for the time that I'm here, build up that broadcasting experience, stick with our basketball team, because the more games you do with one team, the better you get to know the team, and the better that makes your broadcast, because your background knowledge grows. You start to know the team and know their play style. So I want to continue getting as many opportunities as I can behind the mic broadcasting games. As I said, this year I also am the sports editor for the Good 5 Cent Cigar. So I want to sort of continue to write, to edit, to film, to do a lot of those things that employers, looking at it can say, he knows how to do all this stuff, even though I want to be a broadcaster, even though that's my goal. I want to continue to build those reporting skills that, that'll give me more versatility, that'll help me, when I graduate. But I will say one of my main goals is, going back to this huge soccer fan. I don't necessarily think that my goal is to become this super famous broadcaster. Obviously that'd be awesome, but that's not the goal here. I've always wanted to work within professional American soccer to sort of like help grow the game. We have, World Cup that we're hosting in 2026 as a country. That is a year after I graduate. And my ultimate goal is in some capacity to get a media credential for one of those games and to cover that for some sort of professional news outlet, broadcast network, whatever that is. So that's the ultimate goal there. But at some point, while I'm here at URI, I'd really like to make some connections that will help me get into sort of the professional soccer world, the lower rungs of the ladder, just really help elevate the game from the ground up. I've always found that, one of my greatest passions, and to make those connections in the sports media world while I'm here at school would be the main goal, I think.
Well, I'm sure without a shadow of a doubt, whatever the saying is, when I'm watching TV at night and there's a game on, I'm sure I'll be seeing Nathan covering a game, regardless of wherever it may be. Whether it's on the sidelines during the game, calling it a halftime or post game, whatever. I'm sure I'll see you there. Now, completely shifting gears, as most podcasters or interviewers say, I sort of want to talk about more specifically about the sports that you've covered or those who've been there in the sense of their seasons going forward. Now, the first one I sort of want to talk about, or I should say sort of, I will be asking you about, and you probably haven't covered them necessarily a whole lot or at all, maybe, is the football team. But from a student's perspective or a journalist's perspective, in general, like last year, the team started off hot. They were ranked for a good chunk, and then near the end, they took a nosedive, like a plane being on fire, and missed chances to be in the FCS playoff just by a bit, as there were a few teams from their conference that made it in multiple times. Your situation or your perspective on this team and their inability to maintain consistency throughout the year, and then being able to figure out how that is happening and why that needs to be stopped.
Well, it was interesting because there's sort of a difference between the way last season started and ended and the way this season started and ended.
Yeah.
This season, I wouldn't say they were more consistent, but it wasn't that flashy, amazing statistic of
Sure.
a 5-0 start that made us all super excited. We came in with a couple of good road wins, lost the home opener, got kind of killed in the home opener by Delaware. And from that point on, we're sort of wondering, where does this team go from here? And they had a couple of really good wins. There was a couple of great moments, that 7 overtime win, the pick six at home versus Elon, where, those were moments that can define a season.
Sure.
So it was a really interesting one to cover in terms of, the media scene, because there's so many unknowns with the team. And, they pull out a result one week, and then the next week, when they need to win, they wouldn't be able to find it. And it came down to the last week of the season, which was an away game at UNH. And if they had won that, there's a really, really good chance that they're in the playoffs. Or excuse me, it wasn't the last game. It was one of the last games of the season, though. And I was there, not for a media standpoint, but I was, in New Hampshire with one of my friends. And so we went to the game. And there was a lot of controversy in that game, especially with the last touchdown call. We don't have to go into too many details here, but I'll leave it at this. There was a lot of controversy and a lot of photos, different angles of the final play that came out of the game that left a lot of people questioning. But, final result was the final result.
Yeah.
And it ended up being in a very close call that you or I didn't make the playoffs. But I think a lot of the conversation is, where do we go next year as a team? Because there's a ton of losses. We had one of the best running backs, in college football at the time, or in New England at the time. And, just had an absolute breakout season that nobody expected. And, losing guys like that, it's going to be very interesting, I think, to see how this team rebuilds, because it's very much a team that this was kind of their year. Coming off last year, the ultimate disappointment that was last year, this was the season where they could have got that done. And a lot of people will tell you, they should have been selected for the playoffs, but ultimately they weren't. So it's going to be a big job, I think, from the coaching staff to be able to replace some of these losses, to be able to rebuild as a team and keep this success going. Because you think about, back before we had a turf field, the football team at one point was on the brink of not existing anymore. And, how you have Jim Fleming come in as a head coach and can turn a complete 180. You think about the program now compared to where it was 5 years ago. I mean, it's night and day. So it's on the rise. And I think the job now for the coaching staff is, how do we not kind of go back down that hill again?
Well, that's sort of what I wanted to ask you about from a coaching perspective. And although you're covering the team, you as a journalist and media member, you try to have the best nonpartisan view on the team as you can, which unfortunately in today's society, non-sports related, that is a lost art and bygone era in society. Nevertheless, from a fan's perspective, you look at it, in my perspective, seeing as that's where I can only look from it at, is that you say, okay, we've seen the coaching staff change over the last few years. There's been new coaches, been coaches fired, let go, whatever you want to consider it as. And I know the football team being the biggest money drawer for the school, or one of the bigger money drawers for the school, means security for the program and security specifically for their head coach, Jim Fleming. Nothing against him. Seems like a great guy. Of course, I don't want to be calling him out because I have no right doing that. But in a situation like that, similar to maybe basketball, where there's a lot of eyeballs on them, and it's a really win now and success now compared to trusting the process and letting come what comes. Although you saw with David Cox last year getting hand for the last few years of impropriety success-wise, how secure, though, if they can't reach the playoffs, the football team, the next few years, and they keep having these seasons where it's starting out okay, they're doing well, they're getting ranked, to then not finishing well near the end, how secure after these last few years do you think his job will be if they can't produce the playoff type of results?
I think it depends a lot, because if there's a season like this season, this season is one where a lot of people are going to say, hey, we really should have made the playoffs. And it was very close. It was a very close race, a lot of things to consider. And if there's a lot of seasons like this season, maybe it's a little more secure if we just straight up have a losing season. So it depends a lot on that. It's not so black and white in terms of just looking, at how, whether you not or not you make the playoffs. But I think there's a lot. It's different from basketball in a lot of ways. But the main thing is that there's not as much expectation.
Sure.
I feel like in the last few years, and that is now going to change. With basketball, it's like we are a basketball school, so this basketball team needs to win, and we need to do whatever, as you mentioned, we need to do whatever we can to make the basketball team win right now. I think in the last few years, that's not really the case with the football team. I think in a lot of ways, the football team is overlooked. There's not, especially with and that's changed with the renovation of Meade Stadium, with the addition of the lights, but there wasn't always, focus on funding this team, on supporting this team. The fan turnout hasn't always been amazing. But now we're starting to see in these last 2 years that, we have a program that's capable of competing. And so I think in the next few years, it's going to be interesting to see where the fan expectation goes, because the way we are now, where it's just like, hey, whoa, our football team's good all of a sudden. If that continues, I think, there's not as much pressure on this team, especially considering where the team was, as I mentioned, just a couple years ago. But if we start to hold the team a little bit more accountable and say like, hey, we're a Division I school, we want to, we want to hold everyone to, to a winning standard. And we saw what you can do these last 2 years. Now it's time to keep it up. So if there's a couple more, decent years like this for URI, I think that fan expectation certainly rises, and I think that plays into it too. But it's hard to predict. As I said, the focus right now is how are we going to replace the losses this season into next season. And I think, Thorbjorn, our athletic director, very nice guy, is very understanding. I think more so than a lot of fans are. That success takes time.
Yes.
And so I think for the foreseeable future, Jim Fleming's job is probably pretty safe.
Sure.
But in 3-4 years, I think we should expect that we're back to sort of being a consistent contender, in the league and making playoffs. We haven't quite gotten to the point yet where it's like we're making playoffs every year, but I'm thinking in the next 4 or 5 years, player cards, right, that should become an expectation.
And then we can turn into a program like Delaware or a team like that where they're consistently either ranked or they're known to be very successful and so forth. Granted, I haven't gone to a whole lot of URI games. I live 10 minutes down the road from it, so I can't really speak per se on the end goal results. Speaking of basketball, they just had a conference game the other day against George Mason, and although they were close to winning it at one point, being down within 4 and 3 points, they lost by a margin as they have done the last few games, although they have won the majority of their games at home, conference or otherwise. It's been a tough year, of course, as it's been realized, and I think some have accepted, although others are divided and think that it should be different. At this point, you were here last year for the final year of Coach Cox's era before he went to Maryland as an assistant now, where they're having success, deservedly so. Compared to Cox's last year, where are you currently right now as the URI men's basketball team is in the thick of conference play?
I think at the end of last season, it was clear that, a change needed to be made. While we were very good in the beginning of last year, I think that had a lot to do with the schedule. And as soon as the team faced a lot of pretty real adversity and even, having the lead at halftime, and, then going to lose it, I think it was clear that there was a change in mentality that needed to happen. And I remember thinking, these guys, this game's their season on the line, and these guys are out here in warmups laughing and joking and doing all this and all that. And then they're going and losing this really important game. And I'm just remembering thinking like, I'm in no place to judge that. Like, it's not really my place to be like, hey, this is what you need to do. I'm not a, basketball player at all. So, but it just kind of bothered me. And so I didn't disagree with the coaching change. And Coach Cox, very happy that he's finding success, in Maryland. And he was a very nice guy, knew how to speak to the media. But I think a lot of us were very excited for the change. And you see Archie Miller coming in, wow, he's coached at Dayton. He has A-10 experience, very good coach. He said in the introductory press conference, it is going to take a long time for this team to be good. There is an understanding, and we talk about the sort of impatience among fans, like, hey, we hired this good guy, like we have to be good right now.
Sure.
But I don't think, and you look at this team's record and where they are in the A10, it's not pretty. It's not great. But I think you look at this team and it's definitely not, it's not worse. There's no shocking, like,
Sure.
this is a team that, a brand new team,
Yeah.
a couple of returners, and you're trying to gel together in a very tough conference. You have a tough opening schedule. Um, where in terms of what to expect, this is not totally unexpected. And I think Archie Miller saying it himself, we're still a team that's slowly learning how to win.
Yeah.
The effort is there. The talent, I think for the most part, is there. We could use, the transfer portal in the
Sure.
offseason. It would be helpful for us. But we have the components, we have the pieces of the puzzle. And right now they're just putting it together. And I think while fans, want that success early on, it's important to remember that this takes more than a season.
Sure.
It takes more than a year. So I think although it's frustrating, you have to kind of strap into for the ride.
Sure.
Because when Thor and the athletics department made the hire, they knew this. When Archie came in, he knew this and he told the fans this. Hey, like, this is a rebuild. It's going to take a while. We were rebuilding from a program that's trying to find its former success. We
Yeah.
lost a lot of guys, stuff like that. So I think, am I happy with how the team's doing? Obviously, I'd love to see them win more games and
Yeah.
compete in the A10. But at the same time, there has to be a level of, hey, this is a team that needs a couple seasons. So
Sure.
I would say that this, the season is frustrating, but it's also kind of been, it's not unexpected.
Sure. Well, if you look at, and I've been fortunate enough to interview on the podcast some of those who have played for the Sweet 16 team back in the late 80s. And if you look at the records and the statistics, you look, Silk Owens and Tommy Garrick, who are the two main stars of the Sweet 16 team. The first two seasons, they won 2 games each year. This URI team has won 6 games this year, so they're ahead of the curve in that aspect. Now, granted, I will be the first to say there are no equivalents to Silk Owens and Tommy Garrix on this team this year. But as you mentioned, there's a new coaching change. Well, I shouldn't say you mentioned because everyone knows it. They see him on the sidelines, but I think there's more of a gel atmosphere where I think Archie Miller is holding them more accountable for their mistakes. Of course, as you well know, there's a divisive group of fans on social media who say, oh, this person should be playing more, why is this person starting, or this person should be getting more time. Sure, there are some players who you think are good and should be getting more playing time, like Louis Hutchinson and so forth. But you look at it is that they, as you said, it's a slow process. Yeah, there are games like the other day where they were down by 3 or 4, they make a costly turnover pass, and then they end up going down by 10. They couldn't guard the big guy down low. He kept dunking and they kept scoring threes. And then Uri tries to match it back with a 3 and they brick it. And so there are a lot of errors like that happening. But at some point, they will, of course, go through the process like last year and the last few years where they lose a lot of transfer or a lot of people to transfer portals. Commits may be decommitting and players currently leave. But there'll be a core group of guys that will be there. And I think of players like Sebastian Thomas. They come to the program, Rhode Island's first hometown player since Steve Mello in the early 2000s. And I'm not even going to count the Barons because they moved here to Rhode Island, but he stayed here last year. He stayed over while there was a transition, even though he doesn't get a whole lot of playing time. He's not really a starter. He was starting a little bit when Brian was having his difficulties early on the season. But you look at someone like him, who's I think going to be a cornerstone of this program, whether he's the 6th man or not. He is someone you look and say, he's been here through adversity, and whether the guys have a big ego or not, you see what happens. You just hope that the bleeding stops, because you saw yesterday as well. The URI men's team already is down 12. They're in the hole by 12 already early on in the game. And I think sometimes it's a slow start, but then they get back into it. And then you see the effort gets pushed into it. Then you see the crowd goes crazy and it gets loud and really crazy. And you say the fans are here, they want change, but it just takes longer. And you only hope that, as I said, the bleeding stops at some point and the silly mistakes, the obvious mistakes, stop, because there's stuff where you can see there's potential for them to finish, as it said, 9th or 6th in the conference, but they can't at this rate if they're going to continue to do some of these things. I want to, and compared to them, I want to say this: you compare to them, and you've been covering some of the games. I mentioned Zach Austin was there the other night in East Greenwich for the Coaches Show for Tammy Reese. The program has, as you know, has made a complete 180. They had a great season last year. They just barely missed out in the NCAA tournament. They made it to the WNIT and they lost to Quinnipiac in a tough game. They had a good long run. Tammy Reese got signed to a 10-year extension, and she's going to be here for a while. And she's been able to keep the majority of her coaching staff for the program. What's it like to see this program and team, I should say, continue off the success they had last year to now even do better this year, and then try to figure out how do we maintain this and do even better?
So so I've had the very fortunate opportunity to be very involved covering this women's team, and you look at what Tammy Reese has done in 4 years. She's lost 8 times at home. She's won 36 of them, and that's compared to that was almost a flipped stat the other way. But in the 4 years before she came here, she took a team that was not a good program. They were, bottom of the A10. They really weren't good. In 2 years, she turned them around. And you think about, okay, so she's done this in 4 years. What can she do in 10?
Sure.
And even comparing this year's team to last year. So right now they're 6-0 in conference. They have a game, Sunday at St. Bonaventure, who, is a winnable game on paper for them. Obviously anything can happen, but they return home, a big game for second place St. Joe's. But right now they're the only undefeated team in the conference. Sure. They're first place. They're in sole possession of first place. And so you start to think about this team, and they were and not a lot of people know this, but they were in a very similar situation to the men's team. They graduated 4 of their starting 5 last year. Yeah. Were very, very big players. You have like Chanel Williams, Des Elmore, Faposi, like they were very, very, they were starting players, very, very crucial for the team. And Tammy said, you know what, let's do this. She brought in transfers from it. She brought an A10 championship winning Madison Haddix Covington from VCU. She brought Emma Squires from Richmond. She brought in players like Sayani Lassiter from Rutgers, very big transfers. And you go out in the first game of the season against Harvard, 3 of her starting 5 are transfers.
Yeah.
Are upperclassmen transfers. And so you think about both of our programs this year really went through, sort of a rebuild.
Sure.
The women's team's not because of a lack of success, but because it was such it was an older team last year.
Yeah.
They lose at Harvard, and you're like, okay, so maybe this is a rebuilding year for them. And then they go and win 9 straight.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, so somehow Tammy Reese has brought a group of players that are very new, that have barely played together. And they hit the ground running right where they left off last season. And you think about last year where, there was a couple really good shooters that the team kind of built around. Now you have, 4 or 5 players that can name at the top of my head that are incredible 3-point shooters.
Sure.
It's a well-rounded team. And I think what Tammy Reese has done in such a short time is incredible. And so I think in 10 years, there's no ceiling for this team. It's really going to be something that I think all fans are starting to get behind. You're starting to see, increased attendance at the games, which is great. But if you're thinking about a team that's going to be one of this school's most successful in its entire history in the next 10 years, I think Tammy Reese is giving us so much to be excited about in terms of women's basketball.
And I think of this, and it sort of makes me think and relate and correlate this women's team at URI to PC men's team, the sense of PC men's team graduate a heck of a lot of players last year, top players on their team. But Ed Cooley and the rest of the staff, Jeff Battle, the associate head coach, were really able to take transfers and grad transfers and really reload this team, not rebuild, but reload the team. And look how successful they're doing. Women's team compared to URI, and you see the men's team, Coach Johnson, when he was from Louisville and his situation where he got all sorts of stuff. That's another situation. And the women's program, they reload, they get grad transfers, and they get all these other type of players who are able to reload on the team. Now they have the success this year, and now they're in the discussion of not only making the big dance, but getting one of the maybe auto bids and winning the conference. Now, of course, anything can happen at the end of the season, and hopefully they don't have a nosedive as maybe the football team had near the end of this past year. But so you just hope that, and as she's been successful at that, and you hope that they continue to maintain this, and it's not just 2 lucky years. And you see majority of her staff has stayed with her since she got here. They, one unfortunately moved out to a higher position in another school, and good for her. And you always wonder, what's going to happen? They keep having success. Is she going to have to rebuild a whole new staff and create a whole new dynamic? But it's something where you say, at least it's happening. But the thing that I'm questioning about, and you probably know as well as maybe Paige Messier and all these other people at URI, compared to the men's team, even though the men's team isn't doing well, they are drawing more fans than their more successful counterpart sister team, being the women's program, even if they're at the top of the conference
Yep.
and they've only lost 3 games as of this recording, of course. For you, how does URI women's team, even though they are successful and they're doing this great, how did they find the next thing in order to be able to get these people to come to the games? So of course they have people coming.
Yep.
And I remember when I first came to URI, and the only game I covered for the women's program was a preseason game. When there's no one there, I could sit where I wanted. Now they're doing well, and they're still having struggles with getting more people to come to the game, although they've had hundreds of people.
Yep.
How did they fill the stands, even if they're having this much success, from your perspective?
So on the court, Tammy Reese and these players, there is nothing more that they can do.
Yeah.
They have, in terms of statistics and success, they are as successful as you get at this point in the season. 3 losses. I mean, so they're doing their job. They're giving the school a successful basketball program, which is what we want so badly right now, especially with how our men's team is doing. So I think it falls on kind of the hands of the marketing team, how we promote the women's basketball team. As students, we're always getting emails, men's basketball game day, this men's basketball, that. And I say this has started to improve from last year, but, we need to start marketing our women's team on the same level that we're marketing our men's team. And you see this work at schools like UConn, where they have a nationally known women's team that fills up their stadium. And so I think the basketball team is, as I said, can't do much more. They're putting out a very successful product. It's fun to watch this team. They're a very well-coached team. The culture around the team is amazing. So it's about us as media personnel now. How do we promote this team? How do we stick around this team? How does, the PR, the marketing team for URI, how do we incentivize people to come to these games? How do we get a student section, student organizations like the Rhodey Ruckus? How do we get them behind at these women's teams? So it's a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And it falls a lot on us as members of the media. It starts with us coming to the games. The media row is still far emptier for women's games than it is for men's games. So it starts with getting coverage of the team where, we serve as kind of the bridge between, a team and the fans and the media and, the consumers. And so the more people start covering these games, the more the general people will start hearing about these games. And then from there, it's a slow process where we start getting people to the game. So I think it really is the job of, media people who cover the game and URI as a school, how do we push this team? How do we promote this team? And I've seen a notable improvement, from last year, but, still ways to go.
Speaking, I mentioned, and I've talked about and reiterated the point over and over again, almost beating it like a dead horse, but the success and where they are projected to be at the end of the season, what could happen if they keep up the momentum. For them to do that, though, how do they maintain this without, of course, letting it bother them or chew away at their brain to then make the big dance, do well in the A10 tournament, and then maybe make some damage come March?
Yeah, so there's a couple of points that ultimately led to the end of the season lack of success last year. The end of the regular season schedule for this team last year was very tough. They had Dayton and Fordham. If they're number 1, Fordham's number 3, Dayton's number 2. 3 teams at the conference, at the top of the conference, face each other at the very end of the regular season. And so URI hasn't lost at home all season coming into this Dayton game. They get past Fordham. That's great. But then they lose to Dayton in the last home game of the season after going unbeaten at home the whole season. And what Tammy Reese kind of later reveals is that mentally was killer.
Yeah.
You're going straight from that home loss that kind of kills all your momentum. They had done fantastically the whole season, 90% of the season, incredible results. And then you lose to the only team that might just be better than you. And, obviously that's not true. That's an opinion thing. That's, but statistically, that's what I'm talking about. Obviously there's teams that could beat other teams on any given day. The A10 is a very competitive conference, so that's not to discredit any of the other programs. But you're looking at URI and Dayton, you're saying, if you're URI, it's all well and good that you've won this far out, but how are you going to do against a real challenge like Dayton? So ultimately, they fall to Dayton, and then they go straight to the tournament against St. Joe's. And now you're seeing teams like Dayton did this and St. Joe's did this in the first round. They shut down URI shooters, like they shut down Dolly Cairns, and that's half the battle done.
Yeah.
And Tammy Reese talked about this after the end of the last game. So this year, there's a big difference. This year, there's not one or two main facilitators, main shooters. Now you have 4 or 5 different players that can sink it from 3 consistently. It makes it very hard to defend this URI team. They can, Tammy Reese talks about if the starters don't do it, she puts in a second unit and they bring the energy and they go off. And it's a very deep team. The bench, bench points making up almost half the points in a lot of these games. And so it's very, very hard now to defend this URI women's team. So the key for them, and they lost against St. Joe's and they lost against Quinnipiac, and that was primarily mental. End of your season, you're playing some very tough teams, and you just lose your season finale at home today, and you're expected to go on the road to Delaware and suddenly find it again somewhere. And it was a lot of fatigue. It was a lot of mental stress. And I can't say that for sure, but from what I gathered from the players' interviews, Tammy Reese's interviews, the end of the season was a lot for them. So this year it's going to be about, it's all well and good that they've won 6 straight, but there is a lot of work left to do.
Sure.
You have big games against St. Joe's, against UMass. They beat UMass once this season.
Yeah.
And so you can win every other game, but when it comes to these games where this team might be the one that's better than you, you have to win those games. And that's, they did that once. They went on the road to UMass and won against UMass, but it's sort of that mentality of like, when we step up into these big games, the past no longer matters.
Sure.
We have to continue to bring that momentum into Delaware. And I think if they continue this winning run, there's a better chance for them. It's just how does this team put together a complete end to the season, and how do they keep pushing, keep moving? So, Tammy Reese and these returning players will have what happened last year fresh in their mind, and that'll help them for sure. So it'll be interesting to see, what changes, how they finish out, the going into the second, half of this season.
Sure. I mentioned, or I should say talked about as well, Tammy got, and as you well know, that Tammy got that big 10-year extension for the program and more investment into the program, and how majority of her stuff, maybe all besides one person or so, has stayed with her since she started here. With the success that she has as the leader of the program, of course, it is connected and maintained and dribbling down into the other coaches that are on the bench as well with her. And we talked about maybe possible coaching changes, as I can't speak with the football team if they don't produce a successful season completely. For the women's program, when do you think that it would become a situation or issue that, okay, these coaches are now getting the limelight, that now they may be moving on to other programs to become a head coach or a bigger assistant coach, which then becomes another issue for URI women's program to struggle? Do you think that will become a thing coming up soon, or is that a down the line thing that can't be controlled or not?
Here's the thing. We all thought that about Tammy Reese last year.
Yeah.
We were saying, okay, so where's she going after Rhode Island? Because she can go and do some great things, maybe professionally, maybe at another school. And then she puts pen to paper for a 10-year contract, comes in the press conference and says, hey, I want to stay here. I want to make a statement, and I want to make a legacy. That's huge for not only her, but for the team's culture. And you can see how that's affected the team's culture, because you have players like Maya Torre, who's one of the best offensive players in the Atlantic 10, 6 straight double-doubles. She, comes out the first week with that Atlantic 10 Player of the Week. She played 8 minutes a game last year. She played a total of maybe 130 minutes. Sophie Phillips, one of the best 3-point shooters on this team, 31 minutes of action across all of last year. And you think about these players, oftentimes if you're a player that finds that so little playing time, you're straight into the transfer portal. You're looking for more opportunities. Tammy Reese, through her work as head coach last season, convinced these players that, hey, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stay with this program. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to put the work in, and eventually I'm going to get a chance. And now you look at these players that have come from nothing, come from no playing time, and are now the main players in this team. And I think that carries over to the coaching staff. I think Tammy Reese has established a very, very loyal culture.
Yeah.
And I think all of these players and these coaches are very just from what I can see from the outside, it seems like they're all very locked into this.
Sure.
Everyone has faith in Tammy. There's not a single member of that organization who does not have full 100% faith in Tammy Reese.
Sure.
And I think Tammy committing for so long, I have full confidence she stays the full 10 years.
Sure.
I don't see her leaving. And I think that's really helped everyone. So in the near future, I don't see that becoming an issue. Now if they become a powerhouse in the A10 consistently, win it a couple times, what do we see in 4 years? I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
it all depends on sort of what happens.
Well, and I agree with that in the aspect where a culture is being built, and I know she emphasizes that, and of course Archie emphasizes that as well. But then that becomes present and pretty, I should say, present with people coming to look at schools, and they come to tour URI,
Mm-hmm.
and they're having visits. Young female athletes are playing basketball in high school across the country and world, where they're seeing this. They're saying, okay, these players, and may not be looking really into statistics from last year compared to now, but they look and say, okay, these players last year, this point guard, this forward, whatever it may be, center, only played, as you said, 8 minutes a game and total of 130 minutes throughout the season, or just a total of 30 minutes throughout the season. Now they're a cornerstone of the program. The coaching staff has stayed probably 99% the same since this coach got here, and she just signed this new big contract. I want to play there because it shows that, okay, I may not get a little playing time at first, but then at some point I will be getting more eyes on me and more playing and more touches, and that the coaches believe in what's happening here as well as the staff. So I'm going to go there. Thus creates the scenario of success and long-term success being built by Timmy Reese and the staff, and that they're reloading with better players each year instead of rebuilding the program, which hopefully down the road their brother team, the men's team, does as well. For you to be here for these moments as a student, but then also a member of the media department covering these eras, the Archie Miller beginning of his era, Tammy Reese having all this astronomical success with their program, the football team having these near playoff entry seasons as well the last 2 years. So, when I was going here and growing up in South County, my freshman year, you didn't see this. They didn't play too well. It was when they redid the stadium. When I was growing up, they were always known as the crappy team. No offense to the Fleming and the rest of the staff on the team. The men's team had done well. They made the A10 tournament when I was in the big dance when I was in high school. And now there's this new era of both programs, whereas the women's team wasn't that well. For you to be able to experience this firsthand, and so publicly and so in person, what's that like compared to maybe experience of other people at other schools covering programs that might not be the same?
Well, I'm especially, lucky because I'm been made aware of like how the history of the team has been. And for many of our sports in the last couple of years, it's been incredible. And not only the big sports, but men's soccer has had a couple of really good years.
Yeah.
We just produced a professional player for the first time in so many years, who's currently training in the MLS with Charlotte FC. And so you think about our athletics as a whole, our track team's also very, very successful.
Yeah.
It doesn't get a lot of coverage, but that's part of the enjoyment of covering those lower teams. They love it. They love getting that coverage. And so we have a lot of very, very successful athletics, and in the last couple of years, that's been emphasized and it's been brought to the light here. And I think even this men's basketball team, there are positive signs to look at in every game, and you look at the nature of a rebuild and how it goes. So there's more money being dumped into athletics. You look at like days like the Giving Day that happened in October, where people donate to our athletics programs, and they made a record amount of money this year. Facilities have improved. We for soccer personally, genuine grass soccer field, that takes a lot of money to maintain and build. It shows a care for our smaller programs, a beautiful indoor track facility, for our track teams, and obviously the Ryan Center, amazing Division I basketball facility. So with the success comes, greater opportunities. So now we have, the opportunities with ESPN Plus radio, the Cigar, to cover very good athletics teams. The facilities improve, recruiting improves, the players improve. So just to be in the midst of that, to say, hey, like, yeah, we're good now, but we're on the up, and the ceiling, we don't know where the ceiling is. We don't know where this team's going to be in a couple of years. Just knowing that I'm there, and I was lucky enough to come after COVID, after the world of college athletics comes to a grinding halt with the pandemic, and then we're coming out of that, and suddenly our sports teams are here to play. It's just been amazing to be so closely connected with that, and it really kind of helps when you're like, hey, did I make the right choice coming here? Well, now you're getting all these opportunities with all these great teams. It's like you get this at very few other schools.
Before we end here today, and I want to thank my guest Nathan a great deal for coming on this week as our guest. I want to end on a little segment called the One Word Challenge. So for those who don't know what it is, I will take myself and my guest Nathan this week, and I will throw out a few names of people, places, or things, or some sort of subject that has something to do with my guest. He has to do his best to come up with a word or sentence or a few words that best comes to mind when he hears it. So my friend, are you ready?
I'm really sure. Let's do it.
First one, Kingston RI.
It's got to be you. I mean, it seems simple, but it's got to be URI. I mean, that's the only reason I'm ever here. There's nothing really else in this town. I'd say just URI or the Ryan Center.
Yeah.
That's
Next one, the Ryan Center.
Keeney.
Zach Austin.
WRAU.
Success.
URI women's basketball.
Hard work.
I'd say sports media. The sports media group.
And last but certainly never least, in this cosmic universe we all called Earth that we live on here for our lifetime, Nathan Robillard.
Sports broadcasting. That's
Well,
that's what I like to think I am now.
Yes, that's well, and quite successful at it, may I add. Well, good sir, my dear friend, my former tennis teammate, I thank you so much for taking the time to come on here when you're not busy covering the success that is all the programs at URI. This is a great treat to me to sort of chew the fat with somebody, and this is the first time in a while where it's been this sort of situation with a URI student journalist as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I enjoyed it. And it was nice to talk to you. I know we hadn't really after you graduated, we hadn't had connected in a while. So I was super surprised, like pleasantly surprised to get the invitation. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I mean, it's always a great thing because I never got, well, I shouldn't say I never got to, I had the opportunity, but I never wanted to because I really just chose the sports media major just because I was not doing too well academically with the journalism major. So John Panelone, who I'm sure you know, said, hey, you might want to go to sports media and communications, that major, because that may be up your alley. And I just did because it was sports. And then now I'm sort of just doing it this way. So to see people like yourself around my age be so successful, it's a great thing. I want to let you do this before we end here today. Is there anything that you want people to look out for, your own work, your own pieces that you're writing or broadcast in the near future?
Listen, I just this semester, it's really for me about helping to introduce people to kind of get the start that I did. But my pride and joy this semester is going to be the Good 5 Cent Cigar. I'm putting a lot of my work into making the sports section as good as it can be. There's going to be a lot of good improvements coming to it. And we're even doing a little power ranking, like collaboration thing with some other A10 schools. So if I had to point at one thing, I think this semester that I'm going to come out of it and say, hey, I'm really proud of this, it's going to be the sports section of the student newspaper.
And if people aren't in person to pick it up, where can they find it online?
Our website, very creatively named roadiecigar.com. Very easy to find. Yeah, and it's awesome. We publish articles in person, online, and so I'm super excited to continue with that. And yeah, I hope people continue to read it because we do really. It's a really hardworking group of people, and I'm lucky to be joining into that sort of environment because it's a really great culture there as well.
Well, check it out online. Do yourself a favor because there's no other option. You can't do it. You best be checking it, or else I will come and find where you are and say, why the hell aren't you checking in on Nathan's stories that he's writing, as well as not just the rest of the sports department, but the other departments as well. If you really enjoy this, because down the road, when Nathan is in 2026 covering the World Cup hosted here in the U.S., you're going to say, holy shit, I should subscribe to the Nolan Carr Night Show podcast on YouTube and all the audio platforms. Do us a favor, subscribe, like, comment, share, all that fun jazz. Hit that subscribe button so you're notified, and that bell button when you're notified to say, oh my gosh, there's a new episode out with someone else coming out. I can't wait to tune into this. Follow on Twitter, Nolan Carr at Night, and Instagram, the Nolan Carr at Night Show, so you know when new episodes and posts are available. In the words of Johnny Carson, the Dean Talk shows, I will say, take care, have a great night. And, recently in the world of music and entertainment, we lost the heavyweight David Crosby of Crosby, Stills, and Nash and CSN, and he was a powerhouse in the music world in the 60s in the California way of life. And I sort of want to end on a quote he said about time. And he said, don't waste the time. Time is the final currency, man. Not money, not power. It's time. And I thank you for tuning in. Take care. And when we talk again next time, hopefully you enjoyed that episode as well.